How's everybody doing today? Yeah? Happy Thanksgiving week? Something? Yeah, let's go with that. Yeah, all right. Happy Thanksgiving week to everybody. Well, it is an honor to be able to be up here to do the message today. And again, thank you, Pastor Mark, for the opportunity. It really is a blessing for Mel and I to be able to put this series together and especially be able to preach during this time. When we were putting this together, of course, the whole idea of at the table, we are kind of focusing on, kind of part of it was the idea knowing that Thanksgiving's coming up. Many of you are going to be at the table with your family, but we know that being at the table means more than just like eating a meal with somebody. It actually has to do with being in relationship and community with other people. And so just like Pastor Mark kicked off last week where he talked about we need to come to a place where at the table we are making the table bigger. We are widening the table for more people to come in and to sit at our table. In other words, to be in community and relationship with us. Today, I want to kick off the part 2 of this series with the title, Death at the Table. And I'm not just talking about the turkey. So we recognize that as Christians, that death is all over the Bible. Jesus says that you can't be his disciple unless you die. Paul says in Galatians 2:20, I have been crucified with Christ and no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Jesus says in Luke 9, then he said to all of them, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. So you understand that the cross is an instrument of death, right? For us, it's also, as Christians, it's also hope, but it's ultimately that instrument of death. And so when Jesus is saying you need to take up your cross daily and follow me, he's saying you need to die to yourself. He goes on to say, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. Jesus also gives this illustration of how we're supposed to treat other people. In John 15, he says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for a friend. So we have to understand that our Christian life has to be about dying constantly. Not just when we first accept Christ and decide to follow him, but literally every day we're dying to ourselves. And when you think about it, what I don't mean by this is, I don't mean that when we become Christians that we have to give up our personality. You recognize that your personality, your gifts, your talents, those are your strength. That's what makes you unique. That's how you know where to fit into the body of Christ. So your personalities, you need to keep those because that's who God made you. Now, if you get really stressed out because it's just part of your personality, you get stressed out over things, or maybe you get like short-tempered and angry, yes, change that part of you. But in essence of who you are, that needs to stay the same. So you keep your personality, but what it also means too is that now I have to live with this filter in my life. That knowing that I have to lay down my life daily with every decision that I make, with how I interact with people and how they interact with me, I've got this filter now of laying down my life. And what that means. And what that means in essence of preferring other people and thinking about other people. I'm not just talking about this doesn't just relate to sin. Let's just say, for instance, you just want to be a doctor. Maybe I'm speaking to the college students here. Your goal is to be a doctor, and that has been your goal all your life, and then God speaks to you and says, no, I actually want you to be a missionary. Or if you're like, man, I really feel like I want to be a pastor, and then God shows up and says, actually, no, I don't want you to be a pastor. I want you to be a teacher in the local school, in the community where you're going to live. So it does come down to sort of the main, kind of that big thing that we do with our life, sort of purpose, but also every little thing, every little relationship that we have, we always have to bring that to God through that filter of how am I laying down my life, not just for him, but for other people. I don't know about you, but there are times that as a Christian, I just want to let people have it, we have emotions too, right? We get ticked off, we get frustrated with things, we get angry, and I just really, nothing's wrong with being honest about things. We need to do that, but there are sometimes I want to be so blatantly honest where I've been so offensive and hurtful, and I just don't care because I'm that mad. Has anybody else ever been there before? Yeah, it's like literally you want to drop the bomb behind you, slow walk away from the explosion and the chaos that's going on, and you don't care about the chaos, you don't care about the repercussions, you just want to make your statement and boom. But we know as Christians that we don't really have that right anymore, because when we gave our lives to Jesus and we put him in control, we now have to subdue some of that stuff and give that stuff to him. So it is sometimes too, we're going to get into the preference things too, but it's also coming to a place where sometimes those things that we really hope for, those expectations too that we have, those things need to die as well. I think I can talk about this movie here. It's Thanksgiving weekend, Thanksgiving week. A lot of people start watching Christmas movies now. Is anybody doing that yet? Is that kind of a tradition? How many's already watching movies now? All right. How many's going to start this weekend? All right. Nick's there. All right. So you're all in it. All right. So has anybody ever seen the movie National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation? Can we talk about that? Okay. Here's the deal. If you've never seen the movie, you're an adult, figure it out if you're supposed to watch it or not. I don't know. But anyways, this movie is really great. And you see the premise of the movie, Clark Griswold, he just wants to have the best family get-together of all time. And his wife reminds him, hey, Clark, you always go overboard, so you need to be careful with this. But Clark's like, hey, no, it's going to be fine. We're going to be good. And so they invite his parents, her parents, eventually cousin Eddie and Catherine come in, and it gets really crazy really fast. And you get that idea, especially because they all kind of show up sort of at the same time, and they're like laying all their coats on Rusty, and he's trying to carry everything, and it's getting nuts, and they've got the gifts, and then the mom, you think that maybe she's a hypochondriac because she's talking about this mole on her neck, and the dad is talking about how like his back hurts all the time, and you get the impression that the in-laws, that they're kind of like really high maintenance and really don't maybe approve of Clark, and then Eddie's there with his wife, and they've sold their house, and they're living in the RV that is like in front of the house now, and it just gets crazy. And after the chaos of them coming to the house, it gets a little better until sort of the climax of the movie. You get the idea that Clark just wants to have this beautiful dinner with his family. Like that's what it's all been building up to. And so now dinner time comes, and all the food's out, everything looks great and beautiful, and it's awesome, and you see it in their faces. They're just happy, and Clark's just super proud because he got his family there, and all is well. And then they're like, you know what? We need to ask Aunt Bethany, who her and her husband Louis came over for dinner. We need to ask Aunt Bethany. She's the matriarch of the family. Could she lead us in grace? And you get the idea that something's off with Aunt Bethany because she wrapped up her cat as a gift. She made some dessert with Jell-O and cat food on it. So you know that, like, Aunt Bethany's, she's not who she was. And so they ask her, and she's not quite understanding, like, that they want her to say the grace. And they're like, could you give the blessing, the grace? And then she's just not getting it until her husband says, the grace! And her response is, oh, Grace has been dead for years. And then he's like, no, the blessing! And she gets it. And so as everybody around the table folds their hands and close their eyes and bows, she stands up and says, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. She goes into the pledge, and everybody has to join in. Grace is missed. They don't actually get to the grace. They do the pledge instead. And then it's like, that's okay because we've got this beautiful meal, and the turkey looks amazing, and Clark goes to cut into it, and the whole thing just like rips open, and smoke comes out, and all the meat has been cooked out of it, and so they have to decide how to eat this. And if you're like in real life, like if you're one of those people who can't listen to somebody eat chips or Cheerios, like if they have to go to another room, like I'll be honest, like that's how it is in my house. I know where I'm supposed to eat the chips at and where I can't eat the chips. And if that's you, you cannot watch this scene because everybody's crunching on the turkey and it's just loud and obnoxious and stuff. And from there, like the cat explodes and Lewis blows up the sewer because Eddie's been dumping his RV black water into the sewer, and just like everything happens. But at the end of the movie, Clark is standing there with his family, and he, despite everything they've gone through, it's like, this still is what it's all about. It was still all about getting the family together. As crazy and as difficult this has been, this is what really matters. He had a purpose, and despite all his hopes and dreams of what he really wanted to have happen, didn't quite happen, but that's okay because he still got family and there's still purpose. So, first point I want to talk about that there are some times when it comes to this table that you're going to be meeting around with your family at Thanksgiving or Christmas and even beyond the table, that as Christians we need to recognize that, some things don't always go the way we want them to. Expectations aren't always there, but we need to understand that we have a purpose. And our purpose is what? We need to give glory to God, right? Like we need to lay down our lives for Christ, for other people. Like that is why we're here. And Jesus gives us this beautiful verse here in Matthew 9 that really gives the idea of why he came. It's Matthew 9 through 13 says this. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. He said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And when he heard it, he said, this is Jesus, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. I came not to call the but the sinners. So Jesus lays it out there to everybody at the table, whoever's here, that his reason for coming to this earth was for those who are outside of the church. The sinners, the lost, the broken, the hurting, the poor. That was his purpose for coming here. Matthew, in verse 10, this is the same Matthew, this tax collector, he's the same guy who wrote the book of Matthew. So we can kind of understand a little bit more of the transformation in his life. But I want to speculate a little bit here if I can. I've done some research on this as best I can. We don't know a ton about all of the disciples because the Bible doesn't talk about all of the disciples from here on out. But I want to speculate just a little bit based on some of the research that I've done, that I hope that we can get a better understanding of just Matthew and another one of the disciples. Matthew 10, 1 through 4. Again, Matthew is writing this book. He's writing this verse here. He says, these are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector. Now you notice how he talks about his profession there. He doesn't just say Matthew, it's Matthew the tax collector. He goes on to say, James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Now, he doesn't say Simon, Andrew, James, John, the fishermen. He doesn't say that. We know that they're fishermen based off of Matthew 4. We can read that story about how they're called, and we know kind of their backstory. We don't know anything about Thaddeus or Bartholomew, or we know Thomas will end up doubting. Unfortunately, he gets that name, Doubting Thomas, but we don't really know about where these guys are from. But Matthew, for whatever reason, decides to point out that Matthew, the tax collector, and Simon, the zealot. He seems to really only focus on these two careers, or maybe kind of what they're known for. And I'm just going to speculate a little bit here. Again, there's some research to this, behind this, but if we get into the idea of who these guys really are and what's going on in their lives, we understand that Matthew is a tax collector. What does that mean? Well, the Romans are occupying Jerusalem right now. They are basically kind of dictating kind of how the Jews are supposed to live, and the Jewish people have to pay taxes to the Roman people. Then you've got Matthew, who's like, I got to have a job, right? So pretty much what I'm going to do is I'm going to work for the Roman people, and I want to help tax my own people. Can you imagine how awkward that would have been, like for the Jewish people to come to Matthew, to see Matthew, to know that he's Jewish, to be working for the Romans? They know that he's probably getting paid pretty well. Do you realize how awkward that could be? It was probably pretty weird. He was probably a guy who didn't have many friends because he couldn't necessarily hang out with all of his Jewish friends because of what he was doing, and he probably wasn't a part of any Roman friends there. Matthew was just doing a job, right or wrong. He must have been okay with the Roman occupation going on there, despite what that really meant for the Jewish people. And so you got Matthew, and then you've got Simon the Zealot. Now, scholars don't really exactly know what that meant. It could mean that he was a zealot because he loved Jesus a lot, or it could be that he just loved the Jewish people. Because if you're a zealot, that means you have a lot of zeal, a lot of passion for something, for anything. We talked about that here about a month or two ago about the Real Zeal series. And so when you're a zealot, you are passionate about something. And there were a group of people called the Zealots among the Jewish people. These zealots were known for essentially being nationalists. They would do whatever it took at all costs to overthrow the Roman people. By definition, a zealot would be fanatical partisan, to be fanatically strong in an opinion or a cause or a party or a purpose. The Encyclopedia Britannica says that the zealots were a member of a Jewish sect noted for its uncompromising opposition to pagan Rome and the polytheism that it professed, which meant they had many gods. And so they would do whatever it took, even to go against their own people. If they saw their own people that were okay with the occupation, they would have no issues of bringing harm there. So even though this group of the zealots maybe came along after Jesus, we know that the idea was there. We can read about Barabbas. You guys remember Barabbas? Barabbas, at the story of Jesus being crucified, there were two people that Pilate, it was of tradition to let one of two people go, and all the Jews were shouting, crucify him. And Pilate's like, this guy's done nothing wrong. Should I release Jesus because he's done nothing wrong? But then we've got Barabbas, who the gospel writers say that he was a robber, he was a murderer, and he was a notorious prisoner who was in jail because he started an insurrection. That's what zealots would do. They would start insurrections. They would plan. They would mastermind to find ways to overthrow whatever government, in this case, the Roman government. So it's a very good chance that Simon the Zealot may have hung out in this group. Why would Jesus do that? And why would Matthew just point out these two guys and sort of their professions? And I want to speculate. I think Jesus was all about making the conversation weird. He was all about getting us outside of our box of where and how we think God works and operates and what he's supposed to do. He was all about blowing up that box. We know that because he would often make Samaritans the heroes in the stories and the Jewish people the bad guys. Jesus had no problem mixing up the way we thought about God. And so that's why I stand on this, that I don't think that Simon was just zealous for the Jewish religion. I don't think he was just zealous because he loved Jesus. I think he was a zealot, somebody who was very, very passionate about overthrowing the Roman government. And then you have Matthew, who is working for the Roman government. Can you imagine those conversations? Imagine the very first time all the disciples get together. And they're just kind of getting to meet each other because they all probably didn't know each other. Matthew sits down next to Simon. Hey, Simon, what do you do? Simon explains. Well, I work with a group of people. We're trying to overthrow the Roman government, and we're going to do at all costs, whatever it takes to overthrow the Roman government. Anybody that stands in our way, we're going to overthrow them. Oh, okay. And then Simon's like, what do you do, Matthew? I'm an accountant. I count things, money, things, like that would have made for some pretty awkward stuff. We're going to get to these guys a little later at the end. But what I really think, though, that, again, we need to remember that it's not always about our preferences, but it is about why we're here. What is the purpose of us being here, and what are we doing to fulfill that purpose? Second up, I think that we need to choose the hills that we're going to die on. Sometimes, and you may have certain people at your table that maybe they're not at the table anymore because of a rift that happened at the table years ago. And so they're not there because there was a fight. There was too many hills that someone was willing to die on that really didn't really matter at all when everything is all said and done. Do you guys have anybody in your family that they want to be right? They're the right ones. Like you do not try to prove them wrong because you will be wrong. That won't happen. Like it doesn't matter. They're just right. I love the book of Proverbs because Solomon gives us this book that is all about wisdom. There's so much in there about just the need for all of us to have wisdom. He kicks off the whole book about the need to have wisdom. It's more important than silver. It's more important than gold. You need wisdom. And he throws out this verse, which seems to be kind of confusing at first, not very wise, but we're going to see where he's going to get. Proverbs 26, 4-5 says this. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. Wait a second, Solomon, you just told me not to, but now you tell me I'm supposed to acknowledge a fool. So what he's saying is this: don't answer a fool according to his folly, or else you yourself will be like him. So again, getting back to that person who is always right, who can never be convinced, who can never see the error of their ways or anybody else's ways. So you know that there are people out there, and when you try to talk to them, you turn up looking like the fool because now you've just lost your cool. You've just lost it all, and you've gone places you don't want to. You've said things you don't want to, but what Solomon's saying is here, there's people out there like that. Don't be that person. Don't try to talk to that person because you're not going to get anywhere. But then he goes on to say, answer a fool according to their folly, so that they don't continue, so that he will not be wise in his own eyes. And so, in other words, there are certain people in your life who you can talk to. You know that you can be like, hey, dude, you screwed that one up, man. Yeah, and they'll be like, yeah, I really was. I really messed that up. Or they could have a certain point of view, and you can come at it with a different point of view, and you can talk about it, and you may not agree at the end of all of it, but at least you're still in good relationship. Like things are still good there. So why I bring this up is here because none of us should ever be the fool, right? Nobody wants to be that person who is just always right all the time and cannot concede, cannot find any humility within themselves to be proven wrong. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be that person. And we just need to know how to respond because at the end of the day, again, if it's not about our preferences and it is about all of us laying down our lives and dying on the cross, then we need to be about Jesus' purpose, right? What is important to him, not so much what makes us feel better, but what is going to keep relationships. See, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount talked all about we need to keep relationship. Like when somebody strikes you on the face, you don't punch them back. You're like, hey, right here, do that one. When somebody takes from you, you don't say, hey, give that back to me, that's mine. You say, oh, hey, you want this here too? You can have it. I don't know many people, including myself, who really live that way. But actually, that's the model that Jesus gives us, that's how we're supposed to live. It's not only all about us and our preferences, but it is about other people. And he said all this because he knew that if we punched back, more than likely, we've just ruined any bit of opportunity that we would have to speak into their life. Like that relationship at that point is severed. Here at the dinner table, at Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever, you may have people who won't be there because of something that was said years ago. Because of something you said, they said, and you can't get over that thing. That thing is just still there, evident, and you're not willing to get beyond that. And because those things were said, because we've chosen certain hills to die on that really weren't the hill to die on, we've ruined a relationship. Paul in 1 Corinthians 9 says this. And Paul, again, this is the guy who wrote, this is where our theology mostly comes from, Paul. So when he speaks, we need to listen. And check this out. Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those who who not having the law. To the weak I became weak, to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all of this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. So what Paul is saying is this. Now, you got to understand the Jewish religion, culture, society is blowing up right now because of Jesus. Like the Jewish people are following certain laws, rituals, eating certain foods. They've been doing this for centuries. And then Jesus shows up, and then Paul starts speaking, and some of those things that were so important, all of a sudden, Paul and Jesus are saying, yeah, that stuff's not so important. So the world is getting rocked. And so Paul knew how to kind of walk down the aisle, the kind of between them, and knew how to reach out to them. Because what he would do, he would go to the Jewish people, and all he was concerned about was sharing the gospel, was loving them. He wasn't so concerned about telling them about how wrong they are, how they don't need to eat this food, how they don't need to worship like this, how they don't need to have these feasts. He wasn't worried about that because he knew that's kind of who they were, and he knew that if he got into that argument, that might break up some relationships that he could have. And so when he would go over here to the Gentiles, he's not all about saying, hey, you know what, Gentiles, what you need to be doing, yes, you can be saved as well. You can be followers of Christ. But what you need to do is you need to start following these feasts. You need to start eating this food. You need to start doing all this. No, he was just, when he was among the Gentiles, those who have no history of the Jewish religion, he wasn't about bringing that upon them. And then for the weak, I don't know exactly what that meant that they're weak, but just think of anybody who could be in weak, be it faith or struggling in life. What Jesus would do, what Jesus is saying us to do, what Paul did, you just sit down. Hey, how's it going? What are you struggling with in life? Where are you at? It's not about having this prepared sermon in my mind about how I'm going to come down and save this person from their junk and all their stuff. Sometimes it's even best not even to bring scripture up in a conversation, because you just need to sit down with that person and not put any bit of obstacle between them and you just need to love on them. And when the opportunity comes up, yeah, then you can share Christ. Yeah, then you can go a little further. But sometimes this is the posture that we need to have. And Paul had no problem with that. Paul was completely fine with walking on both sides. He's going to go on to write, this is 1 Corinthians, and then 2 Corinthians is going to come, where we get this whole sort of mandate, this idea of being reconcilers, that we are supposed to be ambassadors of reconciliation. In other words, we probably shouldn't just be picking a side. We got to find that difficult way to kind of walk in between the aisle and bring people together and not get too caught up on one thing or the other. It just makes sense. And again, it all comes back to purpose. You know, when we choose the hill to die on, we got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run, know when to count the money. You know how it goes. Paul was flexible. Paul was, in a sense, kind of a chameleon, and he didn't make these strong stances where he's like, this is the way it's supposed to be. You get rid of this stuff, then you can come. No, that wasn't about Paul at all. Father Richard Rohr says, to be in right relationship is much better than to be right. I think that's so true. You know, I got a friend of mine here that is just a dear friend of mine who's been attending Cornerstone for quite some time. We've gone through a lot together. You know, we've prayed together. We've kind of struggled together, and we've just kind of been in it together. And I love this guy. And these are one of these guys. This is one of those relationships where I can talk to him about just about anything. Because again, we've got history. And he's also one of these guys too, where I could walk into a room and see him, and I could say something completely offensive and off color, and he's completely cool with that, and he'll give it right back. You guys have friends like that? I got another group of my friends too, where it's like we'll text each other like something like, I don't want to say crude, but you know, something that's, you know, like, here you go, like, blah, it's a name or whatever, you know, and they're going to give it right back. And I wouldn't do that to everybody, but I know certain people who I can do that with, and when we do that, that's camaraderie. That's like a deep love. It's almost like, you ever watch baseball and baseball players just like smack each other on the butts? That's like this weird camaraderie thing that happens, you know, among baseball players, but you wouldn't see that in the real world. Like if I was out here welcoming people, hey Frank, hey Mark, hey John, that would be weird. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen right there. So you know that there's certain people that you can have that relationship with, that camaraderie. And so not only do I have that friendship with him, but he and I have completely different political views. And so it was a Sunday morning where he and I, we've had these conversations before, and it was a Sunday morning and like a month before the elections, and we're just ribbing each other about where we stand. And he says to me at one point in time, so you're going to vote, right? I'm like, well, yeah, I'm going to vote. And his response is, well, like, I guess I better vote too, because I need to offset your vote. It's like that friendship that we have, and we know that we can go there because we love each other and respect each other. And after we ribbed each other a little bit and we laughed, we just kind of looked at each other, and he looks at me and he's like, you know what? I absolutely love that I could do this with you, that I could have this relationship with you. And I'm like, yeah, I love it too. Because you know what it seems like? It seems like the kingdom of God. It seems like that's what we're supposed to do, right? It's okay to disagree. It's okay to come from different standpoints, be it politically or even just how you were raised or what environment you're coming out of. That's okay, because what are some of the things that really matter? Christ. Am I representing him well in this kingdom? Have I done my job? Am I willing to not die on certain hills, because some of that stuff really, really doesn't matter? And number 3, after we're putting into perspective our purpose over preference and understanding that we don't have to die on every hill, that we're able to just be of purpose and love and love other people, we need to remember this. At every Thanksgiving table, you probably have this, right? This is the kids' table. You gotta remember, we gotta remember, I gotta remember that the kids are always watching us, for good or for bad. I've had the unfortunate conversation with one of my kids one time. See, I can get pretty frustrated with mess, especially socks. For whatever reason, socks just drive me nuts. There was for like 5 years now, we just find socks. They're just stuffed under the couch, inside the couch, on the floor, in front of the couch. Our kids will just take off their socks and just leave them there, and they'll be there for days. And I even threatened our kids at one point in time, like, you owe me $1 for every sock I find. If it's a pair, that's $2. I actually kind of thought that might be a good way to help pay for their college fund, at least get a start down the road. But I have not been a good parent in that I haven't followed up with them actually giving me money. But there was one day that I was just so frustrated because of the socks and the mess and all that I just literally just freaked out. And one of my kids says to me, man, Dad, when I get older and I have kids, I'm never going to freak out about stuff like that. Yeah. I could have chosen to yell at him some more for that comment, but I knew he was right. See, I have no problem holding up a mirror sometimes. It's not always pretty what's looking back. I don't always like what I've seen. But I think we need to do that. I think the Bible tells us even really to do that we need to look at our actions, look at how we're treating people, look at how maybe we're even representing Christ, and let that mirror reflect back. Are we seeing that salt? Are we seeing that light? We got to be okay with that. 1 Peter 3, 8 through 9 says this: finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing. Because of this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. Like-minded, depends on your translation, it would say unity. Sympathy, loving one another, compassion, and humility. Those are those things that we can hold up in the mirror and say, are those looking back at me? How am I doing? And for some of you, you may not have kids. There may not be You may not have a kids table, you may not have kids in your life, but I do believe that as the church, though, we need to always be aware that people are watching the church. Like, this next generation, like, it's up to them to carry the gospel forward. Not up to us anymore. At some point, we pass on that baton, and it's up to them. And so, how are we doing with that as a church? Because the world's watching, right? How have we represented Christ? Have we been that light on the hill? Have we been doing a good job? And when you look at statistically the amount of people, the amount of young people who aren't coming to the church, I don't blame what's out there in the world. I'm not going to blame social media. I'm not going to blame all the Netflix and the Hulu and all the stuff, all the video game stuff to kind of get them distraction, because every generation has to deal with something, right? Back in the 80s and the 70s and the 80s, it was video game systems of Atari and Nintendo and all this stuff, and then there's business, and then there's work. There's a ton of things that we can throw out there, and I think it's easy sometimes just to blame. Just to say, well, it's because of this that's happening. That's why people aren't coming to church. It's because of this mindset, whatever. But maybe it's because of the church that people aren't coming to church. Maybe we had something to do with not as many young people come to the church. This, for whatever reason, they say that this is the most biblically illiterate generation, meaning that you could have kids who have never heard of Jesus, kids who have never heard of Noah or Moses or even Jonah or any of the stories. They just have no clue because they weren't raised in the church. And so we have to ask ourselves, how are we doing with that? And what can we do? Have we at some point in time given way to too many of our preferences and not the main purpose of why we're here? So to get back to, as we start to wrap this up this morning, as we get back to Matthew and we get back to Simon, whatever happened to these guys? So awkward conversations for sure, probably around the table. Weirdness of trying to how to work out this environment about being of one purpose, and that's to share the gospel, but yet you have completely, totally different ideologies and beliefs and preferences at the table. Could you imagine, like, if this ever actually happened and Matthew sits down with Simon and they're having this conversation, I could just see Jesus at the other end of the table, like, because he knows what he's doing. And when we're in those awkward situations, he knows what he's doing because he wants to work something better in us and through us. And he wants us to find a way that despite some of these differences, that we're going to have unity, that we're going to find a way to get beyond that and get focused on the purpose. Jesus, Matthew and Simon, just so you know, the Bible really doesn't tell us more about their story. So we have to really rely on church tradition to kind of give us an idea. So if you read out of the John Fox's Book of Martyrs, we find out that both Matthew and Simon would go off to, of course, share the gospel. Matthew would go off to Ethiopia and to Egypt, and Simon would end up going off to Africa and Britain area. And both of them would die a martyr's death. Matthew would be crucified. No, Matthew would actually have a spear driven all the way through his body. And Simon would be crucified. So despite all the differences, they were able to come to a place in their life where, like, you know what? All that stuff doesn't really matter. What really matters is Christ, is that we share the gospel, that we show love, that we emulate Jesus as he did on the earth. That's what really, really matters. And you could see that they go out to spread the gospel and they die martyrs' deaths. Somewhere they learned that purpose was better than preference. Jesus did not want to die on the cross. In fact, in the garden, he's praying, Father, if there's any other way that I can get out of this, let it happen. But there was no other way. So Jesus gave up his preference for the ultimate purpose for all mankind. And then he ultimately died on one hill. And so for us who have preferences and all these ideas of the way we think things should be, you need to fight for what you believe in. Absolutely, tooth and nail, grab onto that. Don't let go. Fight for it. But never, ever at the expense of causing division among people. never at the expense of causing a situation where now somebody is shut out of your life and they're not willing to even hear the gospel because of what was said and done. His 12 disciples, the kids, watched how Jesus lived, and their lives were transformed. And they chose too to live just like they saw Jesus live and to lay down their lives, not only for him, but for each other. Let's pray. God, we thank you so much for all of your love, for all of your grace, and for all of your mercy. We thank you that you never give up on us. And we thank you that you continue to contend for unity, for love, for grace among your people. We can come up with ideas of what we think heaven is supposed to be like. There's probably a lot of love going on up there, a lot of unity, a lot of grace happening. And as ambassadors of Christ, as those who are called to live out your kingdom on this earth, we're called to bring that down from heaven to earth, to live within unity, to live within love, to live within grace. And of course, people can make that difficult sometimes. But God, if we can hold it out there of what and why we're here on this earth, and it is ultimately to bring you glory, to be your representatives of salt and light, a city on a hill, that we're supposed to bring the restoration, the reconciliation. God, help us to always hold that in front of us and forgive us for the times that we lean more into our preferences than the purpose in which you've called us to live. Thank you for the grace, and thank you for your mercy and forgiveness for those times that we don't. And Lord, just a prayer too for the meals that are going to be happening around tables all over this church through the families that are represented here. Lord, if there have ever been that break in relationship because of, you name it, there's a million things. But Lord, I pray that this year would be a year of restoration and reconciliation among families. God, we love you. We thank you for all that you've done in our lives. And with all eyes bowed, I just want to, if you're here today, it's your first time, you don't really know much about who Jesus is, and you would like to, I would love to come and talk with you. So if you're here today and that's you, I would just ask, maybe slip your hand up so I can see you, and I'll come connect with you after the service, and we can chat a bit. God, help us to be your reconcilers. Help us to be your love, to put your purpose first. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Just want to thank you so much for being here with us this morning. You guys have a great Thanksgiving time with your family. We love you guys. We look forward to seeing you next week. If you're new here today, we want to just invite you to the information center out there. We have a free gift for you. If you did respond, if you're online watching right now, thank you so much for being here with us. If you did respond and you want to even know more about Jesus or know more about who we are, just please text respond. With that being said, love you guys. Thank you for being here. See you next week.